I have worked at St. Clair Medical Center in Chicago long enough to understand that silence can speak louder than pain. Some people come here with broken bones, some with failing hearts, but others come carrying stories they are not yet ready to tell. That was the first thing I noticed about her, Lana. 25, elegant in a way that didn't match the exhaustion in her eyes. She was sitting by the window in room 307 when I first entered, watching the city like she was on the outside of life looking in. The chart said she had fallen, but I have seen enough falls to know when a body is telling a different story. I didn't ask. Patients don't open locked doors when you push, they open them when you make the room safe enough to breathe in. So I asked her simple things instead. Her favorite music, where she grew up, what she liked to eat. Her answers were soft, careful. She liked classical music, though she said it like someone who had read the name rather than lived it. She didn't speak about family. She didn't speak much about her husband either, only mentioned that he was older, always traveling, always busy. No name, no details. Just space where a story should have been. But she wore a wedding ring, plain gold, no diamonds. Strange for someone whose coat, perfume and posture suggested wealth. Not the kind you're born with, but the kind you learn suddenly. Her silence was not shy. It was practiced, learned. I could feel something heavy in the air, not danger, not sadness exactly, something between the two. She asked me if I ever felt like my life wasn't really mine, and I remember telling her that it happens more often than people admit. She smiled then, the kind of smile people learn after life has taught them not to show all their teeth when they hurt. There was intelligence behind her eyes, something calculating, but gently hidden beneath quietness. At the time, I didn't know who she really was. I only knew that the moment I stepped into room 307, something in the pattern of my life began to shift. I didn't love her then, not yet. I simply noticed her, but sometimes noticing someone is the first step toward every mistake that follows. I began seeing Lana more frequently after that. Sometimes for scheduled checkups, sometimes because she would just happen to feel lightheaded, or forget to eat, or have another small bruise that wasn't serious. She always came alone. No driver, no husband, no friend, just her. And every time, she sat in the same quiet way, with her hands folded and her gaze lowered until she chose to lift it. I started noticing that she picked her moments to speak, almost like she was waiting to see what kind of man I was before deciding what part of her story to reveal. One afternoon, while I checked her pulse, she asked in a soft whisper, "Do you think people can love someone and still hurt them?" It was the way she asked, delicate, trembling voice. But her eyes stayed steady, studying my reaction more than waiting for an answer. I told her yes, that sometimes love gets twisted when there is fear or insecurity or power involved. She nodded, very slowly, as if confirming something she had already believed. She told me her husband wasn't cruel at first, that he had given her everything, security, a life she never thought she could have. But she said it like someone quoting a line she had rehearsed. Then she said, he changed, became distant, cold, controlling. She spoke of fear, but her hands stayed perfectly still. No shaking, no struggle, just stillness. I asked if she had friends or anyone she trusted. She looked directly into my eyes and said, "I trust you." And for a moment I believed her. I felt something tighten in my chest, not attraction exactly, but responsibility, the need to protect her, to help her, to save her. I didn't notice then how carefully she had built that moment, how she waited until the room was quiet, the lights soft, my attention completely on her. She knew exactly when to let silence stretch and when to let it break. She never asked me for help directly. She didn't have to. She only had to look at me a certain way, hurt but strong, scared but surviving, and I found myself wanting to step into her world, wanting to be the person she turned to, wanting to be the difference. Lana never begged for rescue. She made you offer it, and I didn't understand it yet, but that is how manipulation works, so gentle, so slow, you don't realize you're already choosing her, long before she ever asks you to. I saw him for the first time on a Wednesday evening when Lana came in for what she described as shortness of breath. I remember the hallway being unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your footsteps sound louder. I was reviewing her chart when I heard a knock, not from the exam room, but from the hallway outside. When I stepped out, I saw a man standing there, mid-40s, maybe older, sharply dressed but not flashy. He had the composed presence of someone used to being listened to. His eyes were steady, warm even, the kind of eyes people trust. He introduced himself simply as Mark. No last name, no explanation, but there was a wedding band on his finger that matched Lana's. He spoke softly, with a careful politeness that didn't feel forced. He thanked me for taking care of his wife, said he had been traveling, said she sometimes gets anxious when he's gone. His voice held genuine concern, or it sounded genuine. I watched him from the corner of my eye, how he glanced at Lana, how Lana glanced back. And something in her gaze shifted. She didn't look afraid of him. She looked aware of him, like someone watching for a cue. I began to wonder if the story I had been told of coldness, distance, and quiet cruelty was missing pieces. Mark asked if everything was all right with her health, and Lana spoke before I could answer. She said she was fine. She said she had overreacted. She said she didn't need further evaluation. Her tone was almost bright, almost cheerful. Almost cheerful. But her hands were clenched in her lap so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Mark placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Not forceful, not possessive, gentle, and she didn't flinch, she didn't recoil, she leaned into it just slightly. I remember feeling something I couldn't name at the time, a fracture in the story, a quiet contradiction. If he was the source of her pain, why did her voice soften when he spoke? Why did she watch his face more than mine? Why did I suddenly feel like the stranger in the room? And yet, when Mark turned to leave, Lana looked at me. Just for a second, and in that second, her eyes were full of something desperate and unspoken, fear, or the appearance of fear. Enough to pull me back toward her without a word, enough to make me doubt what I saw with my own eyes, enough to make me stay. I didn't know then that the most dangerous kind of manipulation is the one that makes you believe you discovered the truth yourself. A few days after I met her husband, Lana returned alone. No appointment, no explanation. She just appeared in my doorway, her coat wrapped tight around her, eyes dimmer than before. I led her into the exam room, and for a long moment she didn't speak. She just sat there, staring at her hands like the words were trapped under her skin. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You saw how he is, didn't you?" "How does he controls everything?" I didn't answer because I wasn't sure what I had seen. She took my silence as permission to continue. She told me her husband was wealthy, extremely wealthy, the kind of wealth that buys privacy, silence, and polished appearances. She said he wasn't always gentle, that the bruises I saw weren't accidents, that the quietness in her voice wasn't personality, it was survival. She said he would get angry over small things, a late meal, a wrong word, a look he didn't like. She described nights where she felt like a possession instead of a person, where she said no, but her voice didn't matter. She didn't cry. Not once. Her tone was soft, steady, almost practiced, like someone repeating a story they've told themselves many times. I asked if she had ever reported it, told anyone, tried to leave. She just shook her head slowly, eyes drifting to the floor. "You don't understand," she said. "Men like him don't get accused. They erase the people who accuse them." There was something haunting about the way she said it, something final. I felt anger rising in me, protective, righteous, blinding. I told her she didn't deserve that she should be safe, that no one should be forced to live in fear. And she looked at me, really looked, with eyes that seemed to hold both vulnerability and something else, something deeper, quieter, sharper. "You're the only person I can trust," she whispered. Those words hit harder than any confession, because they didn't just ask for comfort, they asked for loyalty, faith, allegiance. I didn't realize it at the time, how carefully she had chosen them. I only knew one thing. I wanted to protect her, to help her, to save her. And in that moment, without a single piece of proof, I believed everything she said. Because sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in the exact shape of the truth you want to hear. She told me everything one evening when the hospital was quiet, the hall lights dim, and the world felt too tired to listen. She had come in again without calling, her coat wet from the rain, hair clinging to her face in soft strands. I led her to my office instead of an exam room this time. No barriers, no white walls, just 2 chairs and the space between them. At first she didn't speak. She just sat there, breathing like every inhale was heavy. Then, slowly, she began. She told me how she met him when she was young, 20, unsure, still figuring out how to live in a world that didn't forgive softness. He was older, confident, wealthy, in a way that made life look easy. He gave her things she had never imagined having: clothes, trips, dinners in rooms with chandeliers and quiet, expensive smiles. At first, she felt chosen, special. But then the tone shifted in her voice. She said the kindness didn't last, that the first time he insulted her, it was small, just a comment about how she should speak, how she should walk, how she should remember she came from nothing. She said the first time he raised his voice, she apologized, even though she didn't know what for, and then, slowly, according to her, the apologies weren't enough. She described nights filled with fear instead of rest moments, where being touched didn't feel like intimacy, but punishment. She said he would isolate her, take her phone, her friends, her world, until the house was her entire life and his approval, the only air she could breathe. There were moments her voice cracked, but she never cried, not once. Not even when she said, "I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. I stopped existing, except when he wanted me to." I felt something inside me break for her. I believed her hurt, her humiliation, her loneliness. I believed the silence she said she lived in. And when she leaned forward, her voice trembling just enough, and whispered, "I didn't come here to be treated. I came here because you look at me like I am still a person." I knew she had pulled me into her world completely. I didn't see the pattern yet, the timing, the carefulness. All I saw was someone who had been shattered, reaching for the first hand that didn't hurt to hold. And I offered it without hesitation, because in that moment I wasn't her doctor. I was the only witness to her pain, the only one she trusted, the only one who believed her. At least, I thought I was. Over time, Lana began staying longer after her sessions, lingering in my office under the pretext of helping with files or simply sitting quietly as though the silence between us comforted her. She would tell me softly that my clinic felt like the only place that didn't feel like a cage, that being around me made her feel safe in a world where she was constantly afraid. I believed her, perhaps too easily. We began talking more, sharing small personal details that had no place in a professional space, the songs we listened to as children, the loneliness we both pretended we didn't feel. Soon, coffee after appointments became a habit, then lunches, then slow walks to the parking lot where neither of us seemed ready to say goodbye. One evening, she arrived with no appointment, saying she couldn't go home, that he was worse, that she was frightened. I told myself I was helping when I let her stay, first in the clinic, then later, for a little while, in my living room. We talked for hours, laughing lightly at first, then speaking in hushed, fragile tones, as if the night itself was holding its breath. At one point, her hand brushed mine, not by accident, and I didn't pull away. The boundary between patient and protector softened, blurred, disappeared, and though I should have seen the intention in her eyes, the quiet calculation, I saw only a woman who needed me, and I believe that was reason enough to stay close. It was later than it should have been for either of us to be sitting together in my dim kitchen, but Lana looked as though she hadn't slept in days. Her hands trembled around the mug of tea I'd made her, though the rest of her was still, too still. She didn't cry tonight. She didn't need to. Her silence carried something heavier than tears. She spoke slowly, her voice thin and fragile, telling me the pain was getting worse, that the bruises were harder to hide, that every night she came home, she prayed she wouldn't wake up the next morning. I listened, every word carving a deeper ache in my chest, and I didn't realize when concern turned into responsibility, when protecting her became my burden to carry. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "Daniel, if he wasn't here, I could breathe again." I felt the air leave my lungs. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. She spoke about how wealthy he was, how a violent death would raise suspicion, how the world would only blame her again. But if something happened naturally, an accident, a medical failure, a quiet ending, no one would question anything. She reached for my hand, her fingers cold, desperate, pleading, not for love this time, but for escape. "You're a doctor," she said softly, as if stating something holy. "You save people. Just this once, could you save me?" And I, foolish, hopeful, convinced I was her refuge, felt myself step closer to the edge she was leading me toward, while she simply watched and waited. The plan, when it finally took shape, felt less like a crime and more like inevitability. Her husband already had a history of heart complications, medications stacked neatly in his bedside drawer, a condition the world already believed was slowly sinking its teeth into him. I told myself we were only helping fate finish what it had already begun. I adjusted one of his prescriptions, just a slight change in dosage, supple enough that no toxicology screen would question it. Lana's role was simple, to hand him the pill with dinner, to sit beside him as he swallowed, to look concerned when his breathing shifted into tight, uneven gasps. And when the moment came, when his heart stuttered and collapsed into stillness, she dialed 911 with shaking hands that were far more steady than mine had ever been. The doctors called it a natural cardiac event. The lawyers confirmed the transfer of assets. The world mourned a wealthy man struck again by the same illness that had always threatened him. And then she disappeared, not suddenly, but slowly, like fog lifting from a morning street, calls unanswered, messages seen but never replied to. Weeks passed while I drove to her house each evening, waiting in my car just to catch a glimpse of her silhouette behind the curtains. But there was nothing. The lights stayed dark. The door stayed closed. The woman I loved, the woman I believed I saved, had slipped away as though I had never existed at all. And for the first time, I wondered if I had saved her or if she had used me to escape. I don't know what I expected to feel when I saw her again. Maybe relief, maybe anger, maybe the hope that some part of her had cared. But when I walked up to the house that was bought with the wealth of a man I helped bury, and saw her laughing on the couch with another man, her legs casually draped across his lap like she had never known fear or pain or scars, something inside me splintered. I stood there in the doorway while she stared back at me, calm, unshaken, almost annoyed that I had interrupted her evening. I asked her why she made me believe her, why she let me hold her pain like it was sacred, why she chose me out of everyone, and she smiled, not apologetically, not sadly, just effortlessly. Because I needed someone smart enough to do it right, she said, leaning back against the cushions, and someone stupid enough to fall in love with me. She told me her husband had never laid a hand on her, never raised his voice, that every bruise she showed me was staged, every tear rehearsed. He was a good man, she said, but a good man can't give me the life I wanted. And then she laughed, soft, almost gentle, as if the ruin of my heart was something ordinary. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just felt everything inside me collapse quietly, like a house built on sand, washed away by a tide I never saw coming. I walked out of that house, and I never saw her again. But some nights, when the world is quiet and the lights are low, I still hear her voice in my head. And I remember that love, the thing we believe is pure, can sometimes be the sharpest knife a person ever learns to bleed from.